intolerance because I think this is a part of the illness that's often overlooked. The science is actually pretty good. I didn't have the time in this kind of a presentation to go through the science, but we know that heart rate and blood pressure dysregulation can contribute to symptoms. Patients have POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and a whole family of illnesses with orthostatic. The umbrella term might be orthostatic hypotension. There's a low volume state. The autonomic nervous system is dysregulated, and there's also a degree of hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis dysregulation that we haven't completely put our fingers on, but we know it's there. Don't quite understand exactly the cause and effect and exactly how they interact with each other, but the science is strong supporting these aspects. And the orthostatic intolerance, if you think of that term as a big umbrella over all of these issues, is worsened by dehydration, heat, prolonged upright exposure, and overexertion. So you can see how they all start to tie together. And there are ways in the clinic to measure these to a degree. Orthostatic vital signs can be done. That means we just take your blood pressure and your heart rate supine or lying down until you feel very rested and calm, and then compare that to what they are when you stand up and stay in the standing position for 3 minutes. And the definition of orthostatic vital signs is here, and this will be understood by your clinicians. We can also measure this with tilt table testing, which I didn't put up here because tilt table testing is just not available to patients generally. They're used in some places and not in others. I wanted to share with you a little piece of data I've been doing in my clinic because it's so much easier. Is I record the hours of vertical activity versus the hours of horizontal activity in 24 hours. And I define that as the hours of time with your feet on the floor, vertical activity. That includes sitting in a chair with your feet on the floor. So sitting, standing, and walking would be vertical. And anything you do lying down with your feet up would be horizontal. And it's typical for ME/CFS patients in my clinic to have only 2 to 8 hours of tolerable vertical activity in 24 hours, whereas some of my patients who don't meet criteria for CFS that have fibromyalgia can spend 10 to 12 hours up. That means they can sit, they can work more time on their computer, they can do things even though they don't have great stamina or maybe even aren't able to tolerate working. And the hallmark for orthostatic intolerance is intolerance for standing, or your ability to tolerate standing in one place. So this is a picture of my intake, and you can see that I have the patient circle here on their clinic intake the amount of time in 24 hours that they can stay vertical. Remember, that includes feet on the floor, including sitting, and horizontal. And I think this finding of the pain in the arms and the legs may be due to orthostatic intolerance because the blood vessels constrict out in the periphery and cause some more tenderness and pain. And there's also venous congestion from a little bit of kind of retention of venous fluid in the feet. I wanted to put this slide up. This is a patient of mine with severe orthostatic intolerance. He's had ME/CFS for about 20 years. And I don't recommend IV fluids. This stands for intravenous fluids or IV fluids as a continuous treatment, but I want to show you what a difference it made in this patient. He came to me on this visit, September 2004, and these were his symptoms. So this one at the top would be his sleep, which is a 10, his body aches, and his fatigue. You can see that his cognitive and mood symptoms weren't so severe. Remember, this is high symptoms or severe symptoms at the top. I suggested to him that he try taking a liter of IV fluids because his wife was able to put an IV in. And you can see that when he came back to in November, his symptoms had improved quite a bit. When I saw him in January, he'd stopped doing it. And you can see that his symptoms had increased again. And at this point in March, we put a PICC line in him, which is an intravenous line meant for chronic use. And you can see that over the months, when he took a liter of saline every day, all of his symptoms stayed much improved, predominantly his sleep and body aches. But unfortunately, when you put a PICC line in people, eventually some kind of a side effect occurs, either an infection or a clot in the PICC line if you're trying to keep the PICC line in chronically. And when his PICC line was removed, you can see that his symptoms started to creep back up. And I mainly use this to illustrate that the volume part of orthostatic intolerance is very important, and simply replacing volume and electrolytes can make a difference in symptoms. So the treatment of orthostatic intolerance must be individualized based on the presence of OI, the type, the severity, your age, your other comorbid conditions, and this is something that has to be assessed individually, and it isn't the predominant type of symptom in all patients, although I think it's an underappreciated portion of the illness that can be assessed individually. And also the kind of treatment for orthostatic intolerance, I don't have time to go into, but it depends entirely on many variables and should be discussed with your providers. At the very least, you should stay well hydrated, and if you have low blood pressure, have an adequate salt intake. There are medications, compression clothing, improved fitness, and especially utilizing that rest and recovery position in the horizontal periodically throughout the day to make sure that you have adequate blood flow to the upper part of your body and your brain.